After Mom's death, Dad and his new family moved into my house, sold my belongings, and tried to sell it behind my back. Now they're blaming me for ruining their fresh start. It's funny how quickly life can spiral into something unrecognizable. One moment, everything is normal. My life was, for all intents and purposes, a quiet, stable one. I had a job I loved, a house I cherished, and a family that, despite its flaws, always stuck together. But all of that changed the moment my mom passed away. She had been sick for a long time. Cancer, the kind that robs you of your strength and leaves you with nothing but memories. But when she finally passed, I wasn't prepared for the chaos that would follow. I thought my dad would be lost, that he'd lean on me, as he had done when I was younger. I thought that, as the only child, I would be the one to help him through the grief. But what I didn't expect was that he would start over so quickly, too quickly. Dad met Rebecca, a woman who seemed to appear out of nowhere, only a few months after Mom's death. I remember the first time I heard about her. It was a casual mention, as though he hadn't already been planning it. "I met someone, sweetie," he had said, his voice unsure but hopeful. "Her name's Rebecca. She's good for me." At the time, I didn't think much of it. My mind was consumed with the loss of my mother, the hole in my life that would never be filled. But then, a few weeks later, Rebecca wasn't just someone he was seeing. She was someone he was moving in with. I still remember the day he told me. We were sitting in the living room of my house, the one that had once belonged to my parents, where I had grown up. I was curled up on the couch, nursing a cup of coffee, still mourning the loss of my mother, when he sat down next to me, his eyes full of uncertainty. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice shaking. "I want to move in with Rebecca. And I want to sell this house." My heart dropped. I hadn't expected it. I hadn't prepared for it. I stared at him, my mind racing. "Dad, what do you mean?" "This house, it's Mom's. It's where we grew up." I know, he said, holding up his hands. "But it's just too much for me. And Rebecca, well, she's not fond of the idea of living here. She thinks it's too much of a reminder of your mom. It's time for a fresh start." A fresh start. The words echoed in my head. Fresh start. As if my mother's memory could just be wiped away like that, as if everything she had worked for, everything she had built, didn't matter. The house, the place that held all of our memories, was suddenly just a burden to them. "Dad, you can't just sell this house," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and hurt. "It's my home too. I don't want to lose it." He sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I'm sorry, sweetie. But I need to do this. Rebecca and I need a new beginning, and this house is too full of memories." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt as if I was losing everything, not just my mother, but now my home too. But there was nothing I could do to change his mind. He was already set on it. A few weeks later, things escalated. I returned home from work one afternoon to find boxes piled up in the living room. My heart raced as I walked through the front door. My father and Rebecca were standing there, their faces full of excitement. "Dad, what's going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We're packing up," Dad said, smiling. "We're moving into a new place, and we're getting everything ready. I've already signed the papers. The house is going to be sold." I stood frozen, my mouth dry. "What do you mean, the house is going to be sold? You can't just sell it without asking me first. This is my home too." Rebecca, who had been standing quietly in the background, finally spoke up. "Emma, we've talked about this. It's not about you. It's just that your father and we need a fresh start. This house is too big for us, and we've found something that's more suitable." "Suitable?" I repeated, my voice rising. "This is my mother's house. You can't just sell it without even consulting me." Dad's expression faltered. "Sweetie, I've already made up my mind. It's done." I was beyond furious. "You've made up your mind? What about me?" What about what Mom wanted? But they weren't listening. They were too wrapped up in their new life to care about the past. It felt like they were erasing everything my mother had worked for, everything that was once sacred to us. As days went by, things only got worse. I began to notice that more and more of my belongings were disappearing. My mother's antique furniture, the paintings that had been passed down through generations, my own things that I had carefully curated over the years, all of it was being sold without my consent. One evening, I walked into the living room to find Rebecca and Dad sitting together, looking over a stack of papers. My grandmother's china, a set I had been planning to keep for myself, was now on a list of items to be sold. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" I demanded, my voice rising in panic. "You're selling my things. You're selling everything." "It's not just your things, Emma," Dad said, avoiding my gaze. "We're selling everything to make a fresh start. Rebecca and I need to move on. You're going to have to accept that." I felt the walls closing in around me. "I can't accept this. You've crossed a line. You're selling everything that meant something to me. You're selling my mother's memory." Rebecca stood up, her voice dripping with condescension. "Emma, stop making this about your mother. She's gone, and this house is just a building. You need to let go and stop holding on to the past." I could hardly breathe. Let go? Let go of what? My whole life is tied to this place, and you're just going to take it all away without even thinking about me? Dad looked away, guilt written all over his face. But instead of comforting me, instead of even acknowledging my pain, he turned it on me. "You're being unreasonable, Emma. You need to stop holding us back. We're just trying to start over." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was being unreasonable? I was the one being unreasonable? I felt like I was suffocating. I had lost my mother, and now I was losing my home. My father was no longer the man I had known. He was someone else entirely, someone who didn't care about my grief, someone who was too wrapped up in his new life to see how much he was hurting me. And then, the final blow came. I discovered that Dad and Rebecca had secretly listed the house for sale behind my back. They had signed papers, finalized everything, and were ready to move out without so much as a word to me. I was stunned, paralyzed with shock. I confronted them again, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and despair. "How could you do this to me? How could you sell the house without even telling me?" Rebecca crossed her arms and gave me a smug smile. "Emma, you need to stop being so dramatic. We've already made our decision. This is about us, not you." Dad remained silent, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and frustration. "I'm sorry, Emma. But this is what we need. We need a fresh start. You're just going to have to accept it." But I couldn't accept it. I couldn't accept the way they had bulldozed over my emotions, my memories, and my past. The days that followed were a blur of confrontation and guilt-tripping. They blamed me for ruining their fresh start, for standing in the way of their happiness. "If you'd just let us be, Emma, we could have been happy," Dad said, his voice full of resentment. "But now, you've made everything so much harder." And in that moment, I realized the truth. They had moved on. They had let go of everything, except for me. I was the last piece of the puzzle they needed to discard in order to move forward. I left the house that day, my heart broken, my trust shattered. I wasn't just losing my mother's memory, I was losing my father. And the worst part? He didn't even see it.